So first there were some formatting issues because we're all Mac people and we're using the PC here to present. And when I got input on this presentation from Tim Davenport, editor, it had this fantastic chalkboard motif to it. And I asked him, would you mind if I keep that? It was all lost. All that formatting was lost coming over. So it looks like I just picked a really weird background. So Tim did a much better job when he put this together. And this doesn't make any sense whatsoever. But first, just to talk a little bit about what the sort of reasoning and some of the pain points that resulted in the creation of transfer to begin with, and how we're seeing some solutions based upon publishers picking it up. What are some of the views between the different publishing sectors, whether you're a transferring publisher or a receiving publisher on the journal side? And the last slide, and these are going to be shared via the site, is a lot of links that we will hope that you find helpful. I've been part of the transfer working group for a couple of years now, and when I was previously at Springer, I worked in transition management as one of the duties that I had in the operations division, and so it was a part of every journal bid process. I'm probably preaching to the choir here, but when the opportunity came up to actually get to participate in transfer, that's been fantastic, and it's been a wonderful learning experience. And now that we're part of NISO, I think there may even be opportunities for more people to come on board. So if you have an inclination to get involved, I would say definitely chat with Nettie or with Todd. So what is the context that transfer was really coming in on? I want to tell you why I think it's critical from my standpoint, and I apologize, the text is a little bit small here. CIPIX was a startup developed out of Stanford between the computer science department and the law school, designed to solve some of the copyright complexity for content that professors were using in courses. And when I came on board to do the publisher outreach, I had to explain to everyone else at CIPIX who weren't from the publishing or library sectors that content moves around from publisher to, and they were just, this is the most, they think publishers are the craziest creatures on the face of the earth, that they could not understand why things just couldn't be fixed, and they were going to fix it. And now I had to explain to them that not only do we need to be able to set up our system to recognize hierarchies of publisher imprints and niceties like that, but we also needed to be able to deal with these transfers that were ultimately going to happen. So that's been, from a personal standpoint, it's a real mission that I can take up and go forth with. As publishers are increasingly global and content is increasingly online, whether it's direct or whether it's through an intermediary, and the fact that there may be additional layers there with library consortia being involved, there are a lot of points of communication and points where communication can fail. And part of the rationale for transfer is to try to make sure that that those are being addressed. These are, as you know, very expensive resources that libraries are paying for, and to lose access or potentially lose access for reasons like a lack of communication or different publisher policies not fitting together nicely, that's a terrible thing. And it's only going to get more challenging as we move forward. So again, there's a lot of movement back and forth every year. This is just part of publishers joining together with other publishers, but also learned societies turning to commercial publishers to take over some of those back office duties, and the fact that that's become a very competitive space for the larger commercial publishers. When there's been surveys of librarians, and do we have a lot of librarians here in the room? A few? Okay. This has been identified, as I said, as a major pain point and eats up a lot of staff time. So solving this can free up internal resources to work on other issues. And when patrons are coming and saying, I can't have access, and somebody has to chase something down, that's not, as a publisher, how you want the library to learn that there was a transfer of a title. And not to mention tying in with a lot of the things that Regina mentioned earlier about discoverability and the drive to access and the negative effects that this whole transfer problem can have in those spaces. So transfer originally started as a working group at UKSG, and the issue was studied, and the recommendations that came out as part of the first transfer code were put together by members of that working group. And one of the critical points from the beginning was that all of the stakeholders be represented. Again, nobody wants to dictate to anyone, and there are varying practical concerns, but also business-related issues that come up still today in the code. There are two co-chairs for transfer, one from the publishing side and one from the library side, and I can tell you it is a very, very nicely balanced group, and it leads to a lot of fruitful discussions. And the group is still active today, and now we're part of the NISO family, and we couldn't be happier about that. So there are really three main elements of transfer. The first is the code itself, which is an evolving document that evolves with the way that publishing and consumption of content is evolving. The second is a transfer alerting service, so that we can actually scale this information. And the transfer alerting service, to talk about a little bit, is also continually being revised to better meet the needs that the librarians are expressing about additional granularity as part of that alerting service, but also on a practical basis, questions that come up. So it's definitely a work in progress. And then the third part, which is why I'm here, is the ongoing education and communication. That's really the main focus, of our mission. And now, as part of the working group at NASO, we are dedicated to continuing to drive this process forward. So, as I mentioned, for the transfer code of practice, it is really a communication issue. These are best practices, so this is a voluntary initiative that publishers sign up to endorse, and they are encouraged then to put the transfer information and logo, which may be changing, on their website. So this is very visible and as part of the process. I know that when I worked in transition management at Springer, it was a part of every conversation that we have. And when you're publishing on behalf of smaller publishers and different types of societies, I think it's something that should be disseminated within the organization so that all of the different groups are aware of this and understand how critical it is. Everyone commits to using, to the degree that they can, these best practices. For some publishers who don't maybe have a very, very high, technical capacity, it might be harder for them to meet some provisions than others, and that's definitely something that's taken into consideration. But the idea is that we're all working towards an ideal goal, in the end. Again, I apologize. This was a nice big font before. What are these transfer recommendations about? They're really trying to detail and formalize what are the roles between the transferring publisher and the receiving publisher. Who is going to do what, so that you don't find yourself partway through the transition and then each side thought the other side was going to do it, or worse yet, it doesn't get done. Included in the code as well are an estimated timeline for when these different activities are supposed to take place. Even though a lot of journals operate transfer from publisher to publisher on an academic or on a calendar year, it may well be that the publications that are transferring are operating on another time scale to that. So things may transfer at times that are not what you might expect. How and when to transfer digital content. which is increasingly important, how and when subscriber lists are to be shared, and if there are any details regarding access entitlements, that's part of the process as well. Guidance on how to handle the different identifiers and URL handling, simple things like how long do you keep refer URLs up on one publisher platform, and when that can be allowed to lapse. How to use the transfer alerting service effectively, and advice. And for some publishers, I think this particular piece alone would be tremendously valuable, but it's part of the overall document on really looking at your licensing terms, what is going to carry over to a new publisher, because business terms often don't align in the way that we would hope. And digital preservation was another one of my areas at Springer, so preservation arrangements, critical. So far, the major minefields have been avoided. There's been no problems with anti-competitive practice coming about as a result of these conversations and best practices. Doesn't seem to be an issue around commercial behavior, of the publishers. The receiving publishers are also the transferring publishers, and so agreeing on how everyone's going to behave is a benefit to them. Ultimately, they're going to be on the receiving end of something, and you get what you get. Making it an entirely voluntary code with no sanctions has worked so far. There has been no demonstrated need for sanctions, but it really is a balance between the principle and the ideal, which hopefully is not pie in the sky, but also the really practical details. The uptake to date, there are 60 endorsing publishers, and we all know how many publishers there are, so there's a lot of room to grow this. It depends on how you count it. Thousands, billions of publishers. Well, there are literally any one of us is a publisher now, so don't get me started on that. And there are within the group, we have subcommittees on the publisher side, on the library side, and on the society side. So we're continually doing outreach, and we love to have suggestions for publishers you think should particularly be approached, not necessarily to reflect that they've done anything that deserves to be policed, but just as a part of being a good community member. There are many big names in the journals publishing space, actively represented on the working group, so it's great to get your own organization involved, but also open access publications as well are represented. So we're definitely trying to make ourselves a microcosm. And sorry, switching over is crazy. These are the publishers who have thus far, it's not a complete list, but it's a nice smattering, who have taken transfer on board, so kudos to them. And then the transfer alerting service that I mentioned, what happens here is the transfer compliant receiving publishers are to use this to allow for automation to disseminate the information. It's basic metadata about the journal, and it's stored. So not only is it a series of alerts that go out, but it's something that you can query. And there are a number of ways that you can get access to it if you're interested in being on the receiving end of these alerts. This, I know it's tiny, but it's just an example here of what the details are. The top there is the receiving publisher. The second down is the transferring publisher. Next are details about the journal. Most significantly for our purposes here, the transfer details as they're happening. And at the bottom, of course, the digital preservation arrangements that are in place. So this is the basic metadata set that goes out. Nobody can read this, but that's okay. You'll be able to look at it. It's just an example of what the email looks like when it goes out. The ongoing education and communication, I mentioned the 3 subgroups. So, whoop. I'm afraid to move now. Okay. And if one of these subgroup activities appeals to you, again, I would encourage you to explore getting involved. And so we go to conferences. We occasionally do articles just to spread the word. And the latest developments. So I mentioned, some of the early efforts around the code. So it's now in version 3. Was finalized in late 2014, and I can just tell you because when I was at Springer, that's when the version 3 was being considered. Everybody went through that with such a fine-tooth comb that you would think there couldn't possibly be anything left to change, but we're already well underway considering what the next changes are going to be because the market is continually changing and there's a lot of really good requests. For example, not only the fact that a journal is transferring on a certain date, but when that first issue's actually come out as part of the transfer has been it's been requested to be put in the alerting service, and we think that that's a great idea. Now under the NISO umbrella rather than UKSG, we're sort of shifting into a steady state mode, so it's no longer exploratory and sort of initial stages. It's now growing up, and the working group is a standing committee. Some of the new things that we're considering as part of the next version are whether and to what degree ebooks should be taken into consideration. And when I was at Springer working with some smaller publishers to publish their ebooks was part of what I did, and so I've been advocating for this, very, very strongly. Information, ebooks and journals are quite different, so it's something that we're going to have to really delve into. But in either case, whether it's journal or book publishers, knowing when things like this are happening, is critical. Books are discrete units; they're not like journals, but increasingly book series and online book collections are acting more like journals. The default model for journals has definitely, been globalized. Books are still a little bit more sliced and diced with regional aggregators, so that's something to consider as well. And obviously, books have not gone exclusively online to the degree that journals have, but it is something that we will be covering. As promised, we've got lots of helpful links that you can go to, and hopefully when we share the slides, maybe we can get the nice formatting back so that I can show Tim's fonts in all its glory. So, thank you. I think, do you want to, just for translation purposes, just explain specifically what you mean to...
So if a journal transfers from one publisher to the other, it's a hybrid journal. The new publisher needs to know which articles are stripping them, which are OA, and which licenses.
Maybe the next thing that I'm going to be talking about is I'll be talking about the NSO access and licensing data.
Yeah, right now it's a title level best practice. I know that we, in a lot of our, I think we meet bi-monthly. Is that what it is? In our bi-monthly meetings, we talk a lot about how open access business models are now affecting certain parts of the code. I think a lot of the conversation has been sort of getting towards that granularity, and we know that some of the other NISO initiatives that are underway are really going to help. I don't think transfer could probably do that on their own, and given the capacity for most of the smaller publishers, we just have asked them to get that data out of their systems would be a little bit problematic. But hopefully, moving forward, that's going to be more straightforward. I would hope.
Great. Thank you very much, Heather.
Thank you.